He survived the war, he fought his demons in silence, but the one battle he couldn't win was the one to be seen by his own son. This is the real story of how a father hijacked a TV station. Not for revenge, but for love. That night, people in the town of Prince George, Canada, were gathered around their televisions. Nothing special, just a cold March night in 1970, snow falling gently outside the windows, and on the screen was the usual program. A hockey night in Canada. But then a soft pop came from the speaker. The screen flickered, everything went dark, no signal, no explanation, no commercials, no technical difficulties message. Just blackness blanketing every silent living room. A small boy sat on the carpet looking up. "Dad, why did it go out?" The father looked confused, gently tapped the TV. Neighbors came over to ask around. Everyone thought it was just a technical issue. No one knew not far from there, in a room lit by fluorescent lights, a man was holding a gun, forcing the television station to cut the broadcast. Why? Because of something that seemed small, a hockey game, but to him it was everything. He wasn't just a viewer. He was the father of the man playing tonight, and someone had just stolen the proudest moment of his entire life. The story didn't start on the night the signal was lost. It started decades earlier with a father who carried too many expectations and a son who just wanted to live a life of his own. Roy wasn't insane. He had once been a soldier. More specifically, a sniper in World War II. He never spoke much about what he'd seen, but some nights, neighbors could hear him screaming in his sleep, then waking up trembling on the living room couch, beer can in hand, eyes wide open as if he was still in the Ardennes forest. Men like Roy don't come home the same. They bring back torn pieces of their soul, shredded dreams, and a hollow void that most people will never touch. Roy didn't cry, he drank, didn't talk much. Just worked like a machine in the lumber mill by day, in the garage at night. But there was one thing that helped him survive all those empty years: hockey. Not because he loved sports, but because it was the only thing that let him believe there was still something he could control. An ice rink. A puck. A small boy carrying his last name, wearing jersey number 14, chasing that puck like he was running from a life soaked in blood. His son, the one the whole town called Spinner, started playing hockey when he was 5. He didn't get a choice. Roy bought him skates, made him train every morning before school. In the winters, when the lake froze, the two of them would get up at 4 a.m., head out to the ice with headlamps strapped on. Spinner cried often. Roy stayed silent. Every time the boy fell, Roy just said, "Get up, don't make me ashamed." When Spinner was 10, he broke his wrist in a scrimmage. The doctor said 6 weeks off. Roy didn't say a word, went home, and the next day showed up with a brand new hockey stick along with one sentence: "You still have your left hand." Spinner pushed through. The boy never got to choose. There was only one path: become what his father never dared to dream of, a winner. And when the boy got drafted onto an NHL farm team, Roy didn't celebrate. He just said, "Oh, you're not good enough for the main team yet." But that night, he bought 4 cases of beer and drank alone in the garage until morning. Expectations aren't love. Sometimes, they're just the burden that failed fathers place on their sons, hoping the boy will fix the shame they couldn't. Roy wasn't a bad man, but he wasn't a good one either. He was a father who traded his soul to survive a war and then traded his heart to turn his son into a living dream. And when the network decided to air a different game instead, his entire life, every sacrifice, every hope, every can of beer spilled on the cold floor, shattered with a single press of a remote. A few hours earlier, everything still felt like heaven. That afternoon, Roy woke up early, cleaned the house, carefully wiped every window, checked the antenna wires 3 times. He even went all the way to the electronics store to buy a brand new antenna, the best one they had, because tonight's going to be a national broadcast. Spinner had called him from a hotel in Toronto, his voice unusually bright. "Dad, I'm playing officially tonight. This game's gonna be shown across the whole country, and there's even a live interview during the intermission." Roy didn't say much. He just went quiet for a few seconds. Then set down his beer can, an act so rare the kid on the other end had to ask, "Dad, are you still there?" Roy answered, his voice rough like gravel in his throat. "Tonight, I'm inviting the whole town to watch." And he really did. People filled the house. The neighbor lady brought apple pie. A couple of guys from the mill showed up early with beer and snacks. There was laughter, talking, and even a little kid playing with an empty beer can under the table. Spinner somewhere out there, wearing his team jersey, raising his head under the stadium lights. And Roy, after years of hiding behind a stick and a beer can, was finally alive. In that moment, he believed every scar on his chest, every sleepless night, every time he screamed in his sleep was leading to this night. Then the TV turned on. The screen lit up. The Hockey Night in Canada logo appeared. Roy smiled, his eyes watered, but no one dared mention it. He raised his glass and then, on the screen were two teams no one recognized, a different game, not Spinner's team, no Spinner. Roy sat still. At first he thought it was a mistake. He changed the channel, then changed it back. Nothing changed, just like the world after everything, still that small, cruel, cold place like the trenches from long ago. "They must have changed the schedule," someone said. Another added, "Maybe they cut our region. The signal here's always weak." Roy said nothing. He just stood up, gripping his beer can like he was going to crush it. A friend patted his shoulder, but Roy brushed him off. His anger wasn't drunken. It was quiet, like a machine overheating from the inside. Inside Roy's head, "My son is playing, getting interviewed, doing something I've never done in my life, and I don't get to see it. No one gets to see it. No one knows who I am." Every night he came home with blood in his shoes. Every winter he dragged his son onto the ice in 20 below weather. Every time Spinner cried to quit, it all vanished into smoke. Because of a decision in some control room 1,000 miles away. And in that moment, something inside Roy broke. A piece of his soul, already cracked, finally shattered. The laughter around him now sounded like mockery. Every sympathetic glance became a blade. Roy walked out of the house. No one stopped him. No one dared call him back. And the storm began from the very place his heart once held warmth. The next part would bring the real tempest, where Roy grabs a gun, gets in the truck, and drives into the frozen night with one goal: to force the world to look at his son. At any cost. Night had fully fallen. The northern Canada cold gripped everything like an ancient curse. Roy wasn't wearing a coat. He just walked, slow and steady, like some silent voice in his head was guiding his feet. Not his son's voice, not a human voice, but a mute sound, the kind only those who have survived war ever hear. He stepped into the garage. The light stayed off. Only moonlight came through a crack in the wooden door, casting faint glow on the hanging tools. Wrenches, a broken hockey stick, an old tire, and something wrapped tightly in canvas, a Remington hunting rifle and a battered military-issue 9mm Browning. His hands didn't shake as he unwrapped them. They were used to this feeling, ever since 1943, lying in brush, finger soft on the trigger, waiting for a kill order. The last time he touched that rifle was when he'd thought about ending his own life. But tonight wasn't about dying. Tonight he was going to reclaim what had been stolen. Roy packed the guns, climbed into his old Ford. He didn't turn on the lights. No radio. He drove straight through the night, through forest, through snow, through curves even sober men would fear. Destination, Prince George, 130 kilometers away. That's where the regional transmission tower was. And Roy believed if he could get there, he could make them replay the game. He didn't understand the tech. He didn't know that broadcasts weren't controlled there. But he knew one thing: the network had betrayed him. And you do betray the father of a soldier. You don't crush a lifetime of fatherhood and switch to a different game like it meant nothing. Inside Roy's mind, flickering images returned. Spinner, a little boy, falling on ice, crying. The Spinner older, fighting through pain with a casted wrist. Spinner just last night, smiling through the phone, "Dad, I'm gonna be on TV." Roy clenched his jaw, his lips drew blood. Tonight he wouldn't let the world miss that moment. even if he had to force the whole transmission system to its knees. And with two guns strapped to his side, blood still warm along his spine, Roy drove toward Prince George like a ghost wearing the skin of a father. Ready to use violence to hold onto a moment he should have just embraced with love. The Ford F-100 howled through the night like an old wounded animal trying to outrun itself. Snow caked the windshield. The wipers squeaked, the side mirror had cracked since last winter. Roy stared straight ahead. No music, no dashboard lights, just the engine's groan like the breath of a man unraveling. Along the way, he stopped at a tiny gas station in the woods. Not to fuel up, the tank was still full. He walked into the shop, bought a bottle of the cheapest whiskey, and drank half of it right there in the parking lot. No one dared intervene. The cashier just looked at him and turned away, some instinct knowing this was the kind of man who had nothing left to lose. When he returned to the truck, a small moment unfolded. A little boy around Spinner's age back then slipped on the icy curb and fell hard. Roy froze. For a few brief seconds, the cold stabbed through his chest. The boy cried and his mother rushed over, wrapped him tightly in her arms. He was only slightly bleeding, but the way she held him. It was like the entire world had just saved a soul. Roy looked away. He had no right to see that. He knew he'd gone too far, but there was no way back anymore. An hour later, the dim lights of Prince George came into view. A small city drowned in silence. No one knew that darkness was arriving in the form of a father with a gun. Roy parked just a few dozen meters from the broadcast station. A two-story, cold gray building with only a few windows lit. A small flag fluttered weakly on the roof. It stung Roy's eyes with rage. He stepped out of the truck, half-empty whiskey bottle in hand, the Remington hidden under his coat, the handgun strapped at his hip. The cold didn't matter anymore. Or maybe the heat in his blood had made him numb. He opened the front door, it wasn't locked, and walked in. A young receptionist looked up at him, surprised. "Sorry, sir, we're closed at this hour." Roy didn't say a word. He just pulled out the gun and laid it gently on the counter like it was his final. Roy walked in like a ghost. No one screamed. No alarms went off. Just an eerie silence so chilling it felt like the building itself could sense the cold breath of death approaching. The editing room door was slightly ajar. A group of people sat discussing the evening broadcast, flipping scripts, sipping cold coffee. Someone turned around first and saw Roy, tall frame, dusty coat, Remington in hand like it was just an old walking stick. That person froze in place. Roy didn't need to fire, he didn't need to speak. His eyes, the kind that made war itself bow down, said it all. "Out of the room," he rasped, and no one dared argue. He moved straight to the tech booth, where switchboards blinked and screens showed multiple broadcast feeds. A young technician stood up, trembling, still clutching the controller. Roy pointed the barrel right at his chest. Put my son's game on." The young man couldn't speak. What was this man even talking about? This was just a relay station for Toronto's feed. They had no recording, no rights to choose what aired. No one here had control over anything. "We were just a relay station," the manager tried to explain. "The game came from the main network, we don't have any say." Roy didn't listen, or maybe he heard but couldn't process it. His brain, the same one that once shot German soldiers through mist, was now just a chamber echoing pain. And an image of his son in a jersey fading away like a weak signal. "No game," he growled. "Can't play it back." He kept repeating it like pushing himself deeper into some kind of pit. Then he roared, "Then cut the damn thing off. If I don't get to watch, no one does." With the muzzle of his gun, he forced the technician to pull the lever, cutting off the entire regional broadcast. Every screen in thousands of homes went black. No one understood why. The program just ended, and then silence. Inside the control room, Roy stood there breathing hard, face flushed, sweat chilling down his neck. And that strange silence covered everything. No one dared move. No one dared breathe too loud. The whole broadcast station felt like it was trapped beneath the barrel of a soul locked too long in the dark. And then, as if fate had one last message to deliver, a young staffer, taking advantage of the chaos, had slipped into the restroom, locked the door, and trembling called the police. The call lasted only 19 seconds. "There's a man with a gun demanding a hockey game. He says he'll kill people, please hurry." On the other side of the city, red lights began to flash. RCMP units, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, were already on their way. And as Roy stood there, thinking he had just reclaimed his right to be proud, the price he was about to pay would be forever. The air inside the broadcast room felt thick. Everyone held their breath, lined up along the white wall, fluorescent light casting over pale faces, like each one had just had their real skin stripped away. Roy still stood at the center of the room, sweat beaded on his forehead. His eyes were bloodshot, maybe from crying, maybe from blood vessels bursting under the weight of years of rage. No one dared to guess. He spoke part command, part confession, as if pleading with the wound that never closed. "We'll put it back on Air Spinner's games." No one answered. The young technician kept nodding like a broken toy, trying to explain for the 10th time. "We don't have the rights, there's no recording. The main station chooses the feed. We just relay." But Roy couldn't hear any more, not really. His mind was filled with screams from long-ago battlefields, bombs. A friend curled behind him in a freezing trench, blood still leaking from his eye socket, dying in silence, nameless. "I've killed men," Roy muttered, "in war for my country, and now all I want is to see my son play, and I can't even have that." That last line fell from his mouth like a broken truth. Not loud, not threatening, just pain. Then he raised the gun, turned it toward the broadcasting equipment. "If I don't get to see it, then no one does. Cut it all, shut it down, shut the whole damn city off if you have to." The station manager, older, wiser, saw he wasn't bluffing. He gave a quiet nod, then signaled his staff to kill the entire regional feed, and just like that, Prince George went dark. At a bar a few blocks away, a crowd watching a different hockey game saw the screen cut to black. In a tiny apartment, a young mother letting the TV lull her baby to sleep was left with nothing but static humming into the void. No one knew what was happening. No one knew a father had just shut off an entire city's television signal because his heart had shattered into pieces. Inside the control room, Roy stood breathing hard. He thought he had just won. That he had restored some kind of justice. But deep down, all he felt was emptiness, wider than when he'd first walked in. There was no one beside him, no spinner, no proud voice calling out, only silence. Silence so cruel it sliced across your face like wind on a frozen battlefield. A battlefield where the guns had gone quiet, but the blood and the cost of survival still lingered in the air. But he didn't know that outside, police lights were all. The glass door creaked softly. No shouting, no alarms, just the crunch of snow under boots and the steady, dry breathing of men long accustomed to danger. One of the three officers, the commander, raised his hand and signaled. "Roy, stop, put the gun down, we just want to talk." Inside, Roy stood less than 10 steps from the door. The Remington was still in his hand. He heard every word. He even heard the wind slip through the silence between those words, something only those who have faced combat recognize. These were the final words before the shooting starts. He knew. And strangely, he wasn't afraid anymore. He walked slowly out of the control room, down the hallway where light from outside spilled in, casting shadows on the dried blood on his sleeve. Through the corridors of his own memory, where war, loneliness, and the dream of a boy in jersey number 14 had never once let him go. Roy stepped into the parking lot. The whole city seemed to pause. No TV lights in the homes, no sirens, just snow and 3 barrels pointed at his chest. "Put the gun down, Roy, we don't want to shoot," the commander repeated. Roy looked at them, not with anger, not with hate, just tired. He lifted his gaze to the night sky, no stars, only gray clouds and the metallic scent of winter in the air. He wondered if he died right here, right where the signal had been cut. Would anyone remember him? Would anyone remember that all he ever wanted? was to see his son play. Then he slowly moved his hand toward his waist. No one knew what he was reaching for. Could be the gun, could be the whiskey, could be something only he understood. The officer to the left shouted, "Stop right there." But Roy had already drawn the gun. He didn't lift it. Didn't fire. Bang, bangs. Bang, 3 shots, one to the chest, one to the shoulder, the last into the lower abdomen. Roy collapsed like a rotted tree felled after a storm. Blood soaked the snow, no final words, no one ran to him. No arms wrapped around him like the mother who had clutched her child at the gas station hours earlier. Only the reflection in the glass door, his face, blank, and oddly enough at peace. Hundreds of miles away, on television screens across the country, Spinner was being interviewed. He smiled, shy, proud. The reporter asked, "Do you think your parents are watching?" The Spinner replied, voice soft, "I think my dad is definitely watching." No one corrected him, no one told him that his father never got to see him. And never would. In Prince George, the snow kept falling. Police laid a white tarp over the body of a man who had dared to defy the entire system for a dream. A dream that seemed small, but was everything to a man who had nothing else. At one end of the country, blood had frozen into snow. At the other end, the rink lights still blazed bright. The game ended. The Toronto Maple Leafs took the win. The whole stadium erupted in cheers. And right there, in the frame of a nationally televised broadcast, was Spinner, Roy's son, who had just delivered a dreamlike assist in the second period. He was invited for a post-game interview. The reporter smiled and leaned in with the mic. "How do you feel, playing on national TV in front of millions of viewers?" The Spinner was still catching his breath, cheeks flushed, eyes gleaming. "It's unreal. I think my dad is watching. He's always been strict, but I know if anyone's been watching every move I made tonight, it's him." The studio went quiet for a moment, not because anyone knew anything, but because that sentence was honest, pure, full of love. Behind the camera, no one knew that father had collapsed 90 minutes ago in a snow-covered parking lot in a city where the broadcast had gone dark. No one at the national station knew about his death. No one said a word to Spinner. And Spinner, like so many young people standing at the edge of glory, believed that life was finally starting to smile at him. He called home. No one picked up. He left a voicemail on his father's machine. "I played the way you told me to, Dad. I hope you were watching. I love you." The landline in Roy's house had no one left to answer. The house sat in darkness. The neighbor's apple pie still on the table. The remote tossed under the couch. And the TV still off since the moment the signal went dead. Roy's spirit, if it still lingered somewhere, was probably sitting in front of that invisible screen. Finally seeing his son for real, not through the twisted lens of expectations or regret. Just a boy growing up, and doing something Roy had never believed he deserved, a moment to be seen. And that was the most. But he didn't do that. Roy chose the gun instead of words, chose anger instead of tears, chose to prove his love by cutting the signal to an entire city, not knowing that all his son ever needed was a word of encouragement, a hug, a proud look in his father's eyes. Spinner never found out what happened that night, at least not right away. When he was informed of his father's death a few days later, he collapsed in the hotel room, not because he learned his father had died, but because of why he died. The press called Roy a madman. Headlines screamed, "Father hijacks TV station over hockey game." They didn't talk about the years he lived alone after the war. Didn't mention the mornings the two of them skated through snow together. Didn't mention that maybe Roy never knew how to love the right way, but he loved in the only way he knew how, harshly, silently, and desperately. Spinner read the article and said nothing. No press conference, no biography, no interviews. He only did one thing: he sat out the next season. During that time, he went back to the old house. Everything was still exactly as it had been that night. The chair his father used to sit in, the spot where the remote fell, the new antenna still in its box behind the sofa. Spinner didn't cry. He just stood in front of an old photo, a young Roy in uniform with that stiff, awkward smile and whispered, "I wish you'd asked me if I even wanted to play. I wish you'd let me speak. I wish I had let you hug me once. Not just through a TV screen." Because sometimes what breaks a child isn't being yelled at. It's being loved in a way that's never explained. Being turned into an extension of a dream they never chose. Roy's death wasn't just an incident. It was a wake-up call that when a dream stops being your own and gets forced onto someone else, it becomes a prison. Roy wasn't a murderer. He was a father carrying wounds deeper than any bullet, and he chose the wrong way to be seen. And that is the most chilling part. Sometimes in the modern world, we don't die from guns. We die because we don't know how to love. And we're too scared to learn again. This story has no happy ending, no perfect forgiveness. Only the truth that a shattered soul